Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very nice to see so many of you here today. We will talk about the maritime cybersecurity. And I am Svante Einarsson. I'm heading the Department on Maritime Cybersecurity Advisors within DNV. And I'm here to present to you what we are going to discuss today. And it's navigating cybersecurity challenges and the IACS UR implementation. Moving on directly to our agenda, I thought was the next slide. There we have it. I will start with a brief introduction about setting the scene. What are we expecting and what is actually going on in terms of drivers in the maritime cybersecurity domain at the moment. Then I will hand it over to Jarle, our colleague from ship classification in DNV. He will talk about the IACS UR requirements and how it is progressing into implementation into our industry. Then we will have a larger chunk of our session. It will be an industry panel. We have a representation from Wärtsilä and Ocean Infinity here today, together with our DNV colleagues as well, that I will interview and talk to you about the recent developments. And after that, we will stop the online session, and we will have an opportunity for you here in the room to also ask your questions to the experts here on stage. So, with no further ado, I will start with my presentation, and it's about the global transformation leading to rising needs for cyber resilience and security. Looking at a global scale, first of all, not specific to maritime, but what is actually going on in our society at large. And there are three different topics. First of all, we see how digitalization is driving us forward. We see how physical systems are now getting interconnected with cyber-physical systems. And we see how artificial intelligence or also global supply chains are getting more complicated and requiring more and more data for us to be able to harvest these benefits. Next topic is the geopolitical and polycrisis out there. We see how war are going on out in Europe, but also out elsewhere, which is also leveraging on cyber capacities. We see how decarbonization, climate changes, and even COVID has forced us to be more digitalized moving forward. And there are regulations coming into place to try to step up our game on the resilience manner. The rise of cybercrime is clear as well. We see that across the different domains. We see how there are tools out there that enables also organized crime to be more effective, and even state-sponsored organizations with hackers and similar. Moving to the maritime domain, we have similar setup. First of all, the increasing digitalization and connectivity, not just for the new builds, but also for retrofits of older vessels with interconnectivity on a remote basis for maybe a retrofitting of systems. This is a crucial enabler to be able to deliver on the decarbonization topic, but it also leads at the moment to a resource shortage in the industry, where we are combining and then we need more expertise when we are combining maritime and cybersecurity domain capabilities. The next topic was the regulation here. We see how many of the different bodies are enforcing the industry to move forward. You know about the IMO, also already from 2021, with ship manager being the focus on managing the risk. That is now ongoing to different degrees depending on different organizations. We have the IACS requirements coming into effect or already came into effect, which Jarle will talk about more later on. We have critical infrastructure regulations and other regulations that are more, let's say, regional, and they can also impact our compliance. And finally, there is also the whole financial game and talking both to charterers, but also the insurance industry that needs cybersecurity follow-up. We see how the cybercrime is moving on a global scale, not only looking at widespread IT focused and not targeted attack on the IT infrastructure of vessels, but it's also starting to spread into the OT or control system domain on board vessels. And we see an exponential growth of these types of attacks, at least reported nowadays. And I think the black numbers, of course, quite large still. I will dive a little bit into each of these categories further before I hand over to Jarle, but we did a survey last year and we published a Maritime Cyber Priority Report as DNV, which came out with some conclusions based on over 800 people that we surveyed across the industry. And we can see that everyone is quite, let's say, unanimous when it comes to understanding, yes, we believe that the future will also require us to even further digitalize our vessels. And that will help us again to be able to deliver on the decarbonization topic and reducing emissions, as well as route optimization. A little bit further on the regulation side, EU started already also including the aspects of the maritime domain, not only for the officers on shore, but also for passengers and crew members, that we need to take care of personal related information on board vessels. IMO, which I referred to before, since 2021, IACS now, and critical infrastructure regulation coming to force this year in Europe, but also other places in the world already been there. And that's the target is there rather on the organization itself. But if the vessel is a particular one that can actually have an effect on the energy production or the energy resilience of the company, of the nation, then it can also be part of these requirements. And we in DNV, we have also already this year been supporting US Coast Guard, for instance, to review their draft in new requirements that might come up already next year. We have seen how IMO has published a new expansion of the 2021 rules and has already been approved by the Safety Commission at IMO. Next year, it would be also need to have a confirmation by the Fall Committee in order to be adopted by IMO. But clear is that these types of continuous development in regulatory demands are to be expected also in the future. We asked the question to these 800 people as well, how do you see the whole relationship with regulations? And as you can tell, the numbers are quite weak here when it comes to the understanding of cybersecurity regulations. So I think we still have much to do. Of course, the numbers might be better when we release the 2024 report later this year. But it's a lack of, let's say, experience with working on these the standards. And I think there's also a lack of competence and knowledge from cybersecurity domain overall that is behind these numbers. Before I end, I wanted to make it clear also that we can expect different types of incidents in the industry. We have a very variety of types of incident, everything from IT systems being degraded to OT or control systems. We have targeted attacks and we have untargeted. We have willingly malicious attacks and we have unintentional attacks. Just to mention a few of these, the AIS spoofing here case is not the only one. It happens on a regular basis, but it's a typical thing where you can say it's a malicious but fairly targeted attack. We see a cruise vessel a couple of years ago that was actually probably the largest, let's say, safety consequence so far in our industry, where they had to pull in tugs in order to get the vessel back safely without endangering the passengers and the crew on board. And that was an IT malware spreading into the OT domain, which was not targeted, but it was part of a widespread malicious attack across the world. We have service engineers being part of the, let's say, threat chain here as well, which is not an intentional attack at all, but it has direct safety implications. We see how an emergency shutdown was triggered on an oil rig when a service engineer wrongly connected to the wrong rig. He thought he was connecting to a rig that was not in operation to do an update of the software, but it was actually running. And we can see how targeted malware attacks are said to also be trying to gain remote access into the onboard systems of our vessels today. So different varieties, and I think that is the key, that we see the limitations are being expanded, the boundaries are being pushed. And we asked also the question to the people that participated in the survey, how likely they think that different scenarios are possible in the future. And as we can see, most people are agreeing that yes, it can implement or affect our business. It can stop operations or hinder us to deliver our cargo or similar. But even 72% said that they think it's likely that it can have an environmental impact. And even more than half are saying it could have a safety impact in terms of injury or even loss of lives. And that is something we need to take in mind moving forward. Now, I will ask Jarle to come up on stage and present the next session. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Svante. I'm going to continue the presentation, but a few reflections on cybersecurity first. Some may say, is it cybersecurity again? Why do they keep talking about it? Is it actually relevant or not? I think it is, but I think somebody is making our job difficult. If somebody comes to you and says cybersecurity is the #1 topic in the maritime industry, don't care about this engine or this hull stuff. If cybersecurity is not in place, don't sail. I don't think that. I think there are other important safety aspects of shipping. I think cybersecurity is another topic that we should treat because it's safety relevant, and the maritime industry is excellent on safety. The safety incidents that we have on a global scale and a global operation is quite impressive. So I think cybersecurity is important. Also for us personally, you may know friends or family that have been hacked, maybe lost quite a lot of money. I had an interesting personal experience as well. I had a customer meeting on the west coast of Norway. I landed in Oslo, and I got an email on my phone saying, your Apple iPass or iTunes password have been changed. And I had 2% left of my battery, and I was supposed to take an Airport Express train. And I panicked, called Apple, asked them to change it, and they say, do you have your iPad available? Can you please log into it? And I don't have my iPad, I have a Samsung phone. So they were, no, then you have to find somebody with an iPhone. And then I lost battery. I talked about my Visa, my credit card information in my iTunes account, and I got quite nervous. Had not a very pleasant ride home. And then I found the iPad in the room of my daughter, which had installed a new app and changed my password. So luckily for me, I was quite relieved, even though I was a bit irritated as well. But this is important for us. It could have been somebody hacking my credit card. So I believe cybersecurity is important. It's one of the important aspects. I think also for cybersecurity, it's something that we need to take as a safety topic. Don't make it too complex, don't make it too easy, but make it realistic. That's what I like that IACS has taken cybersecurity on their agenda. We've been around for 160 years, in DNV at least, some other classes even more, protecting the safety of the maritime industry, or at least supporting protection of it. And if we wouldn't help against cybersecurity roles, we wouldn't do our role. We wouldn't safeguard life, property, and the environment. That's why I'm very, very happy that all classes have come together to make unified requirement according to cybersecurity. And now it's becoming mandatory. Every vessel contracted from 1st of July this year have to have cybersecurity as part of class approval. Not key laying date, not some other contract date. It has two parts. It's the IACS UR E26, which is the vessel design, as well as the operation, owners and yards, and it has E27, which is for suppliers. So that's the things you need to know. It applies to almost all vessels. If you have a vessel in international operation, carrying more than 12 passengers, more than 500 gross ton, which is the majority of the, at least globally trading vessels, you'll in. It doesn't apply to national water operation, ferries, fishing vessels, navy vessels, wooden ships, non-moving ships. So that's of course out, but it applies to everything that we treat as the global merchant operation. It also applies to the safety relevant equipment. It does not apply to a CCTV equipment, an IT equipment, crew entertainment. It's out of scope. It's the safety relevant equipment that we are responsible for ensuring that are safe for our vessels. So that's the IACS UR that you need to know. When I talk to ship owners, I typically have two different aspects towards how they treat this IACS UR, or maybe somewhat in between. But the minimum part is make it because you have to do it. It's a compliance topic. Everybody have to have cybersecurity as part of their class order now. I think that's good because these will keep the minimum level of compliance in the industry. Another view on it is digitalization, because not only is cybersecurity avoiding important safety threats, it also helps enable digitalization in a safe manner. We don't want to connect our vessels with these fancy new equipment to make them more efficient and jeopardize the safety of crew on board. That's our number one task, in addition, of course, to environmental aspects. So think about the compliance part, but for me, compliance is just as important as well. Just because the vessel doesn't sink every day, it doesn't mean that we drop the lifeboat or the life vest. We have it on board, and cybersecurity is the same aspect. So take a balance between compliance and preparing for digitalization. In DNV, we tend sometimes to talk a lot about technical aspect, right? That's what we are good at. I'll try to limit it only this number one slide today. But this one will be a bit technical. When cybersecurity is happening, cybersecurity is nothing you can turn on and off, and it always works. Maybe the most cybersecure thing I have in my bag is the paper, but it's not very software-based. But if it's software-based, if it changes, if it's connected, it will have risks. So it means that you need barrier management, multiple things that may fail to keep it secure. For example, if you want to have somebody accessing a system, it can be based on physical access. So can somebody get on board a vessel? It can be based on the network topology, which protects if somebody gets on board. You can view the crew entertainment, but you don't get to view the navigation system. And then it continues with multiple barriers. For example, you need a username and passwords. You maybe have a complex password. And if you log in a few times, then you're blocked because you cannot log in too many times and guess the password. So these add up on each other, protecting the system, because one barrier can always be breached. Nothing is 100% secure. Maybe in this moment, but tomorrow there's a vulnerability, and we have to keep. So you may say cybersecurity is rusting a bit more quicker than steel. For IACS UR, it's built up also a defense in-depth concept. So you have the certification of suppliers. So all equipment which is safety relevant have to fill requirements. About 30 requirements, making sure that the equipment is safe and secure development. That means that they have to continue patching their equipment. So that's the first level of defense. The second level of defense is the network barriers. So that's the, so you say, digital watertight sections on the vessel. So if you get access to crew entertainment, of course you shouldn't get access to the engine control system. So that's the yard main task, and that's in the E26. And then, as cybersecurity is a continuous topic, make sure that you continuously look at cybersecurity, and that's the owner's task. Procedures, handling suppliers, handling new risks. So that's how the IACS UR is built up, protecting in different layers. In DNV, we're also working on it. We have it in our rules. It's just another chapter. We have something called Cybersecurity Essential, which is the compliant level. If you're an owner, put that into the spec, then that's about it. I also have a quite important task now. I'm trying to train our whole organization on cybersecurity. So that means that there are mechanical engineers, electrical engineers all around the world that need to support the maritime industry on cybersecurity. There's about 1,000 surveyors in ports around the world. There's hundreds of surveyors at yards. There's hundreds of surveyors meeting suppliers. All of those have to be competent in cybersecurity, supporting us, because my unit cannot do that with a small unit I have. I think my family wouldn't be happy if I traveled every day neither. So this is the major task for us. But we have come far. We have about 300 vessels and systems already contracted for approval, voluntary. So that means also that the maritime industry is taking this seriously. 200 vessels contracted already, 50, 60, 70 delivered. It keeps engaged. I think we're actually up to almost 250 now, but those slides were made a couple of weeks ago. And there's 100 suppliers which are going through type approval, maybe 50 of them ready already. So this is good. And what I also like about this IACS UR is it's pointing to an IEC standard. Because if DNV would come up with something fantastic, LR, BV, the others would come up with something fantastic, nobody would do fantastic things. But if you point to an IEC standard, it's very efficient. It means that a computer made for manufacturing industry, power generation industry can be used in our industry. It's very cost efficient. So that's why I like about the IEC standard. And we don't do this. We actually don't make any systems or vessels at all. So we really work with key suppliers and yards to make this easier. I want to tell you a little bit now about the histories, what we've experienced the last few years. And for the ones that have been around with cybersecurity for years, you see, it has been a history. I think 2 years ago, we barely filled the first row here. I remember we had the big room and not so many people. And now we have a lot of people in the room and also watching online. So we started back in 2017. So we had a few very clever, good engineers that made the rules in the beginning. They didn't make it in a dark room alone in DNV. We actually talked to the industry. And that's key for us because we have to work with major suppliers, yards, and owners. If not, we don't make something that can be applied. That was back in 2017. 2018, we came with the first rules pointing towards this IC standard. In 2019, 2020, there was a few owners that came to us. We have some requirements for a charter. Can you help us? So that's why you have the 10 vessels in 2020, 2019 as well. The light blue ones are the number of vessels, and the dark blues are systems. And then suddenly in 2021, it started quite high. But this was still voluntary. But you may remember from 1st of January 2021, cybersecurity became part of ISM. All ship managers have to consider the cybersecurity risks. And some did it and asked us to verify the vessel for technically. And then we were lucky, I think, in 2022, because then we tried to work on all the jobs we had. We didn't try to have so many customer meetings. And in 2023, it just rocketed again. And we had 50, 60 vessels ordering 10, 20 systems coming to us. We need to prepare. And that's where the IACS UR also came into place. And so far this year, we're about the same level. And at the end of the year, it's going to be probably close to 200 vessels and systems. And next year, I guess DNV contracts about 300 to 400 vessels per year, which we need to treat for cybersecurity. A major challenge for us as DNV, but also for us as an industry. And I'm happy that we do it together. If you see the names of the companies here, both the suppliers we've been working with as well as the yards, these are renowned industry players. If I go and look at where do we have our products, so this is a bit more maybe an industry insight that you wouldn't get from just reading the UR. We work with global players. Maritime is global, and we work with them around the world. You can see typically Asia has more vessels, the light blue color, number of vessels ordered at Asian yard. But you also have a few in the European yards. And you also see with suppliers, we worked a lot with suppliers in Europe, but also in the Asian market and also in the US market. So you see there's a global pickup of the topic, which we appreciate because it makes it easier for ship owners to actually order vessels that are actually secure, not only on the paper. And when we see upon segments, we see that container vessels have been ordered a lot lately. And if you read the news, you know that all the big container lines had a cybersecurity incident on IT, which cost them millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars. So almost 100 container ships ordered voluntarily, tankers, offshore, gas carrier, passengers. So all of them have been ordering it. And that's good because that means that 200 vessels have been ordered voluntarily. Yards are getting ready for it. Secondly, which systems are in scope? So control systems, bridge systems, communication systems, so all of them have come to us in variety. So actually now we're getting to a place where yards are ready, we are ready, and suppliers are getting ready. That's a positive move. One more industry insight I'm going to share with you is what we get from different owners. So we see from offshore and cruise, they are really having commercial pressure. They have to do it because they want to protect their passengers, so it's a more self-driven. And offshore is just part of critical infrastructure. Cyber risk is high, but the segment drive, they do it because they want to do it, but it's also costly because they have a lot of software-based systems on board. Tankers, containers, ro-ros are a little bit different. When we talk to customers, some say we have to do it because the charter told us, and others said charters never mention it. So it seems to be a split there in the industry. And I think the cyber risk is as well, it's actually not so high, but if you want to disrupt global trade, hey, why don't hit those industries that we're part of? So I think the risk is there. We see tankers, containers ordering a lot. Ro-ros, actually not so much yet. And effort, I think middle, not so complex, but still quite connected. Bulkers, multipurpose, those have not done a lot yet. They're waiting for the minimum compliance, which is acceptable, but I think also here the cost will be lower because it's simpler vessels. We even had project with Navy, so NATO navies, luxury yachts. One of my colleagues went to a vessel with, I think, a wine shelf across 5 decks, and he tested cybersecurity because the owner wanted to look at it. So this is our industry view. Trying to summarize here, a last slide before handing over to the discussion is cybersecurity is important. There's mandatory requirement coming up. DNV has cybersecurity rules for it. We had it since 2018. We have about 300 already that we are practicing on together with you, together with our surveyors. Owners, put it into your spec. I think that existing vessels will also be pushed on cybersecurity because charters are concerned about it, so that will come as mandatory, or if not mandatory, but voluntary. Yards and designer, you have to build up competence on it. And suppliers, I think that's where you have the biggest task. They have to sometimes change their system. But I think that's also good because our industry will be more safe and secure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jarle. You may have a seat because we're moving over to the panel discussion. And help me to welcome our other panelists. We have Chris DeWitt, Director of Cybersecurity and Compliance at Ocean Infinity. And we have Matti Suominen from Wärtsilä, also Director of Maritime Cybersecurity. Please join us on stage. You can have a seat.
Yours. Will you sit there?
Yeah, I'll sit there.
Okay.
Okay. Let's start with you, Chris. Maybe you can just tell us what you are doing at your company and what's recently going on, where you're focusing on your cybersecurity topic.
Sure. So I'm fairly new in the role. I've been there around 5 months. Ocean Infinity is a ship owner. We have assets that are fit for purpose to be autonomous someday. Right now, we're seeking minimal manning concepts, moving people off the ships and onto the shore to remotely operate those vessels. They're highly connected, lots of bandwidth that we eat up to do what we do, and lots of concerns around cybersecurity if you think about the ultimate goal of having a ship with nobody on it and what that really means. It's a juicy target, as I like to say, for badness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Matti, what about you? What are you doing and what's the driver at the moment in Wärtsilä?
So, Jarle, you mentioned about this already, how the OEMs are definitely in the role where there's a lot of products that need to be made secure, documented properly, get the approvals in place. That's basically been my last 2 years in a nutshell. Wärtsilä makes all kinds of things, from engines to navigation systems to pretty much everything that was mentioned there as being in scope. Very few things are actually not in scope. So that's really been us driving that forward. And it's been a lot of R&D work, it's been a lot of documentation, compliance work, but also it's been a lot of kind of figuring out how all of this is going to work. When you are one of the first movers, you are in this kind of new thing, not everything has been thought about, not everything is ready, and you just jump into the process and the process will guide you. So I think it's been a learning experience for us, building this together, figuring out how it should go. And then, of course, working with the stakeholders. We have obviously work with a lot of yards, a lot of owners, just kind of having those discussions as well on what they are looking for and how we can be there to support them.
Thank you. And Jarle, you already introduced yourself, but maybe you can share a little bit how you think that the industry is handling the requirements on IACS so far.
I think it's definitely a major change for us. Cybersecurity is quite new for many of us. And in one way, it's quite impressive how we're doing it. When something comes, the industry reacts. That's positive. But we also see the equipment been around for 40 years. Nobody knows who made them. And suddenly we come, what's the username and password for this one? Can you run antivirus on them? That's a major change. And to redevelop a control system takes years. So definitely a huge challenge for us to lift our surveyors, as I mentioned earlier, for yards to lift their designs, but also for suppliers to change equipment. So this is a big challenge, but I think it's very positive that what we're doing now. I think we're actually doing something before the accident happens, and that's something that always warms the heart of a classification society person.
Matti, do you agree with Jarle here, or do you have further perspectives?
I think it's a fair point, definitely, and a lot of things have a long lifespan, and OEMs like us, we need to support a lot of the equipment out there. It's also the sort of reverse problem that when you sell something out there, let's say an engine, you cannot just go 2 years later saying that that engine is now obsolete and expired, and you need to buy the fancy new engine to get all these features. So sometimes we struggle with the fact that we have a lot of new features coming out, if you would buy a product today and get all the latest and greatest of everything, there would be a lot of solutions to a lot of those problems. But then you struggle with the fact that a lot of the equipment out there has been out there for a while. So I think it's definitely a real issue and a real challenge for us. But it's also not as simple as, if you have a phone, for example, you buy a new phone every couple of years, so you never get to experience what it is like to use a 20-year-old phone. That's just not a thing. But in our industry, it very much is a thing.
Yeah, that's Chris, is that something you realize as well when you're operating older vessels and challenges?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for having a common vocabulary with our makers of systems, and I think using IEC guidance and some of the other standardized terms. MITRE comes to mind. MITRE did a really good job of coming up with some terminology to use. I think the more we can get to that, then it's easier to understand the risk of these systems. And I don't know if you're going to ever get a score on this system versus that system, but at least you can get a gauge, and you can say that this maker is doing more in some regard than this other maker, and maybe that helps your choice. Yeah.
Moving back to new systems, Matti, what is it that you have been doing in terms of trying to reach the IACS requirements, or is that a topic that you've been working on lately?
So it's definitely a topic, and we basically have two tracks there. So one is where you have existing equipment that has been around for X amount of years, and there you need to make sure if you're still selling that equipment that it meets the requirements. So you need to find ways of improving or changing the equipment in some way so that it complies. I think we've been somewhat fortunate enough that this is not a new thing to us as such. It's not like we 2 years ago, learned about cyber and started doing cyber work. It's obviously been ongoing for much longer than that. So I would say a lot of products actually were close to compliant when we started. There was a lot of that happening. Oftentimes it wasn't necessarily always documented the right way. Of course, you don't know what the right way is before it happens, so it's impossible to do that. But we didn't always have that problem where we need to start from zero and just build it up. But with new equipment, particularly, that's been a discussion we've been having, that, again, thinking about that 10, 20, 30, however many years of lifespan you are thinking about, you need to already plan ahead. The baseline of what the E27, for example, is today, that's great. And a lot of equipment, when brought to that level, like Jarle said, that raises the baseline to a reasonable point. But if you're now designing the next generation of engine control systems, you don't want to say, okay, that's the baseline. Because by the time you're done, world has moved on. By the time you've sold them for 10 years, that's not the baseline anymore. But you're still selling the engine control system. And I don't need to tell the audience here, but it takes a while to put an engine control system together, do all the testing and all the work needed. So it's not something that if somebody tells you that tomorrow there's new rules, you don't change it in that sort of period.
Is there any particular area, technical area, where you would say, okay, this was a particular challenge for Wärtsilä, or?
I wouldn't say. I think a lot of our challenges really came from documenting a lot of the features we had. So there wasn't like a specific area that would say that this was where like 80% of the effort went into. I think every system had slightly different challenges out of the technical ones that we had. And I think if anything, maybe most of the discussion went into the integration topics. So again, somebody might say that E27 is the component part of it where, you know, it's one piece of equipment that has certain features, so you can sort of think it in isolation. But if you read the requirements, they are really, many of them are about integrating with other things. And it's a challenging problem because it's not something I can solve alone. I cannot just design everything on my own, because I also need to consider how everything else plays into how the yard is going to put it together, how it connects to other equipment. So I think those are maybe the most challenging parts of how do we solve those integration problems. And that's not purely a technical problem, it's also a technical problem, but then you need to start a dialogue of how do we do this together.
Good point. And Chris, before I come back to you, Jarle, what about the new building challenge for you in Ocean Infinity? I know you are working on autonomous vessels and highly sophisticated assets, but maybe also other topics on where you see, okay, this is where we have put extra effort on new building.
Yeah, I could talk to that. So for E26, it was somewhat of an easy button for us. Our vessels are classed with DNV. DNV has been writing on the topics that came out of E26 for a while now, right? The guidance from 2017 or something had a lot of those same concepts in it. So even the work that was done before I got there was based on that guidance. And now that it's a requirement, it's a nice driver for us to go and say, all right, now we have to ask our yards to do these things. We have to ask our makers to follow these guides. And so for us, it's an enabler, really. I think at the end of the day, we get better, more reliable ship than if we hadn't done it that way. So I don't know if I answered your question.
I think it's okay. Are there any particular areas where you would see, okay, well, this is great with IACS and it's great with the class notation, but I'm still missing something. Is there further aspects that you, documentation-wise, or where you would be on your wish list?
Yeah, I guess the clear and present dangers to us are our supply chain, and some of them get it right, and some of them get it horribly wrong. And so I think it's that communication back to the suppliers to say, here's what we expect. Well, now it's written in ink somewhere that here are the things that you have to go do with 27 for sure. And the fact that 27 was based off of IEC 62443, again, it's the lingua franca that we can use with our makers to talk about what we were expecting of them. Yeah.
Very good. Jarle, what about you and what's your perspective here? I'm thinking in the sense that you have been working with a lot of different shipyards as well. Is there any learnings from all these, their challenges as well?
I think we as an industry have an inherent, let's say, disadvantage compared to maybe some other industries like the airline industry, the car industry. You have stakeholders such as Airbus and Boeing, Volkswagen and the Ford and those. They integrate the whole vessel, right? They tell every supplier what they need. They make the standards. They produce it in millions of examples, and they also maintain it over the life cycle of the vessel, of the car. They have a huge interest that it's good for 25 years. In the maritime industry, of course, the yard would like to make a vessel that stays for 25 years, but the warranty period is probably 6 months. And it's the suppliers that puts all the pieces together. So the lack of a system integrator in the maritime industry is a big challenge. It means that the yard takes it on, but it's still very challenging because also suppliers comes with their different pieces and bits and put together. And then the owner gets something in their lap that they need to maintain over the next 25 years. That is an inherent challenge. But I think many of the yards are now working on it, and we have the luxury of working now with yards across different yard regions. They are updating the design, but we still see the actual cybersecurity testing is something they're struggling with. Because if you use the checking steel plates and suddenly you're supposed to do vulnerability scanning of a firewall on board the vessel for remote access, that's a difficult change. So some of them use consultants to do it for them, but I think eventually they need to have that as part of their own organization to deliver safe, digital-ready vessels.
And what is it that DNV does more than just giving out the class notation to support for shipyards, for instance?
I don't know, your question was that something is missing in the class notation here now? I thought we were having perfect class notation. No, I think coming back to that question, class notation covers what we know should be covered. But cybersecurity changes every day. And even we cannot make rules that are always valid for the foreseeable future. So that's why we recommend everybody to do a two-step approach. One is do what you know is right, and then look for things that can go wrong. You can do pen testing exercises, or you can do, but always do that risk assessment to look for new things. That's important in cybersecurity. And how we work with the 𝐲𝐻s is to lift this minimum compliance. We give information, we give templates, we give documentation, we try to give guidance, and we see our role as guiding the industry, because DNV alone doesn't have any safety impact directly. We don't make systems, we don't make vessels, we don't operate them, but we support the industry in that indirect way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's move to beyond IACS and looking ahead, and then the challenges that we can expect. Chris, what's your position here? Do you fear a changing threat picture out there and a complex world, and what is your take on it?
So we were talking about this earlier offline, which was, I think 6 years ago, I sat at one of these things and talked about how cybersecurity really isn't that complex. It's just super, super tedious. And I'm kind of eating those words a little bit now, because we have a very connected world. The ship as a sensor is a thing now. And it's only 6 years between when it wasn't and now it is. And so, yeah, I think about all the ways people can walk in the door. I think for a lot of companies, it's not gripping the basics by the horns, as we say in Texas. If you don't get the basics right, the rest of it won't work. It just won't work. And so we used, at least in this new gig at Ocean Infinity, like I said, I've only been there 5 months, but we needed a test that we could do, hopefully remotely, for cybersecurity in the process of assuring our vessels novel technologies on those vessels. And one of the ways that we solve this, I say we, but basically DNV had written this guidance in the RU ships, which is, it's a rule. It's not like something you can't do. It's a rule. You should be doing this. And so for me, it was an easy way to go in and say, this is going to give us good enough coverage of what we need. And then we can look at maybe the addition of what the notations would offer on top of that. So it worked really well. We got, I think, all but 2 of the tests done remotely. One of the tests was while the ship was in production. I was a little afraid of doing that, but it worked great. So again, I start to run off on these things, and I don't even know if I answered your question. Sorry about that.
It's fine, but I want to pick up on what you said. It's a tedious job.
Yeah.
Are there any recommendations to the audience on how to make it still effective, even though you need to do the same type of exercise or the same type of activities over and over again?
Yeah, this is something for the industry. I think in order to scale from 1 ship to 5 ships, it's an easy jump. To scale from 5 ships to 20 ships is not so easy, and to shift from 20 to 300 is even more difficult about what you can apply to fleets as they grow. And so I think the key to that is looking at everything you do in terms of how can we automate this one thing. There are automated tests that could be done. We could have automated probably 3/4 of those tests in scripting it and spending the time to do that. We haven't done that yet, but we intend to. And I think that applies to all these tedious pieces where we just have to get very fast at doing things. If there's an AI move that you could do to make it better, faster, stronger, but I think at the end of the day, really, it's breaking down that tedium like any good engineer and count things per thing, automate them, and manage those automation tools. Yeah.
And how do you work with the crew and the other colleagues on shore to make this an attractive and important topic?
Cybersecurity is a tough one because you're generally trying to beat them over the head with it and say, don't do these things. I see things maybe 2 years from now, where we need to be rid of passwords. Just no more, because they're just the bane of our existence. Even labeling cables ends up being problematic now. We should be well past that. So I think some of the things that are in 27 for sure, and even in the IEC guidance says, there's some smart things you can do around infrastructure of these computer-based systems, and we should listen. I mean, a lot of smart people worked on that stuff, so.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Matti, looking beyond IACS now, what is it that you recommend the industry to also prioritize on? Because there's probably other topics that you have in mind in Wärtsilä.
For sure, and for me, like when I started reading the text originally a few years back, and then when we've been working on it, to me it feels almost like we are building a set of good tools and capabilities into these products now, based on what is mandatory. But often when I talk to people on whether that's yards or owners, it feels to me like those don't necessarily get taken into use that much. So you're basically required to have this capability in your systems. Obviously, some use them more than others, but I feel like a lot of the good work goes unused quite easily. And to me, if I think about sort of what's happening after E27, what's next, whether that's a new set of requirements or whether that's just implementation work, what I would do is really try to make the most of these things that you are now getting. Mm-hmm. Companies like Wärtsilä are building these capabilities now into every product and making sure they work and you can use them in different ways. If there's a requirement to offer you logs and information about what's happening in the system, make use of that. What I fear is that it's going to go such that they check that capability is there, and then the tick in the box happens. And beyond that, nobody cares too much, because actually using the capability is not a requirement. There's a lot of, if you read the requirement, there's a lot of requirements which say something to the tune of the system needs to be capable of or have the capability of doing such and such, but it doesn't specifically say you actually need to make the most of this. So I would really start from make the most of those good features out there, design the vessel around that, make sure you have the operations around that. And then once you've implemented all of that, we can get into the more exciting and interesting topics. But I think if you don't do that, then we are not ready for the other things. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't start from the hard stuff and then eventually go to the easy ones. The easy ones have been selected for a reason.
Yeah, good points. Are there any recommendations you can give to the audience on how to, let's say, motivate the organization to take these additional steps using the data or the capabilities that are there, but not necessarily only interpreting the lowest level of the requirements?
I think it's really a mix of using the mandatory part of it to some degree, saying, yes, this is something we need to do, that helps. But then it's also a matter of education, combining with other things where you are talking about business goals, kind of forgetting the cyber lingo. I think very often as cyber people, we tend to talk about all the fancy cyber things rather than going for this. There's actual business impact to this. Mm-hmm. It was mentioned earlier in the presentation that there's been vessels that have stopped. There's been losses from that. That is definitely going to just keep increasing as everything gets more connected. So really tie it back to that. Don't go and talk to people about password rotations and how cyber is important, because it isn't until you're connected to something that is important. There is very little inherent value in cyber as such.
Okay, thank you. Jarle, what are the next steps for IACS, do you think, and are there further, let's say, major challenges for the classification societies in the coming years?
I actually think we have a bit of on our hands already. We should make sure most of the equipment that we come and check, there are things that are not properly covered. We have to make some workarounds, find some things, add some procedures for the crew. So it's still quite a bit of a step to take on what we actually have in front of us now. So I think we should focus on that one. And then I also believe that there will be a natural commercial driver, because oil majors, cargo owners they would like to know that the vessels they charter in are secure. They care about the cargo. So I think it will be automatically come for existing. If you order a lot of new vessels and they have cybersecurity actually being prepared for safe digitalization, why don't I get it from my existing vessels? So I think it will be a natural lift for existing vessels, But I wouldn't support a mandatory lift yet, because I think that may be difficult. Rather focus on the new build. I think that's a good iteration. And then I have to say, when you come to this, what you mentioned now, digitalization, the opportunities, and what you're doing with the autonomous, remotely controlled 80-meter vessels, that awakens the engineering in me. But if you have analog systems, cybersecurity is not needed. We're actually creating problems for ourselves because we're connecting and putting a lot of software on it. That we have to keep in mind. But I'm a strong believer that the maritime industry will be more efficient. They will be connected, better operation, even better safety, all that. Why don't help the crew giving safety advice of a collision that may happen? Why haven't we done that before? I have it in my car. So these are things that we should give to them. And it makes it more safe, but we do the cybersecurity part and keep it secure. So we do cybersecurity because we do digitalization. Many people talk about digitalization as an aim in itself, then we fail. Cybersecurity is not an aim in itself, but it's a mean to ensure that we can continuously become better. And today, I had a meeting with some the Greek technical committee, fleet manager there, and they said 70% of the vessels have remote access to do remote maintenance of their engines. Excellent, they increase their uptime. But that means that somebody can connect to the vessel and turn off the engine of a cruise ship in bad weather close to shore. We don't want that. And so that inherent risk is there today. Maybe they pull out the cable, so it's not so relevant. Looking at Chris here, when you have the autonomous vessel with always connectivity and no crew to pull out the cable, then we're level up. But today, the risk is there. But the attackers do what is easiest, where they earn the most money. So they hack Windows computers. They hack things which are easy to hack. And as long as we're a bit more difficult, we'll make it more difficult to them. We will not be the first victim. And there are some segments which are really politically critical, energy business, global trade, where you need to be more concerned. But don't make it more important than it is, but it's important.
Let me add one thing there. Svante, you're asking about things that IACS can do for us. And I don't really look at IACS for the guidance. It's great that they put this stuff together. But like I said, the industry had been talking about it for multiple years and came to the same conclusion. So, but what I do rely on is somebody to decode what IACS is saying into something I can hold in front of my leadership and say, this is some statistics and things around this thing, whatever it is, and why we want to do this. If you look at the industry right now, a lot of the makers, not you guys, because I know this for a fact, but there are makers that will provide you with a password of maker123 on all their stuff. And it's just ridiculous. Or they post it in the user guides, which are published online. I mean, to me, that is a basic that's been around since the 90s that we still are not overcoming. So now, I'm hoping that a lot of the requirements that come from IACS that are now mandatory, which it is, make their way into their world. But boy, it's a tough leap to get them all to come over, especially the niche suppliers of things, the smaller ones, not the Wärtsiläs of the world, but the small ones.
It's a good point. Thank you so much for this first insights from the three of them. We have opportunities also here in the room afterwards, but I'd like to give a warm applause and you can enter the stage. And before we stop this session, I just want to also give you a little bit of hint. We will have this recording available on our websites. You can also there access a quick check that we have released. It's also on the URE 27. If you want to test out the system, you can get some feedback and insights on that. There's also a way of looking into further articles and insights that we can provide, contact information and services that we provide as DNV. Thank you all online for taking the time to join us here today. We will stop the online session now and focus our attention to the people in the room and here at SMM. Thank you so much. And with that, now we have a short video.